Welcome on Texas football. Time for State of the Program. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton and CJ Vogel of On Texas Football. This episode of State of the Program brought to you by our friend Adam Lowy over at the Lowy Law Firm, loweylawfirm.com. Gerry and CJ, we're now a week into practice. Today marks a full week that the Longhorns have gotten after it. We've got some news and notes we want to go over, have a couple of key questions we want to answer. What happens now with Andre Kojo's absence? Who does that affect? We're going to ask each other the position that is surprising each of us the most, and then the player not being talked about enough. One guy on each side of the ball, offense, defense. But first, we want to talk about leadership on this team, because this is something that Steve Sarkisian brought up yesterday. And Gerry, you and I talked about it this morning on Coffee and Football. CJ, you were at the press conference with Steve Sarkisian yesterday, or press availability. Arch Manning going the extra mile right now to maybe make this team better than what it is. Yesterday, Sark explained the following of what happened with Arch Manning following a practice.
I try not to get too involved when players are having meetings like that, because that's for them. If a guy's looking for extra meeting time, extra work, but that doesn't surprise me from Arch. That's the way he approaches the game. He wants to be really good. We had a walkthrough last night. I thought was a really good walkthrough after practice yesterday, and I was leaving the bubble, and I turned around and Arch had the offense and about half the offense out there having his own walkthrough with those guys afterwards. So that's the way he operates. That's just what he does. He's always going to try to find an edge. He's always going to try to make sure that he's in the best space to compete at a high level.
Guys, that's the sort of leadership Texas needs, especially from a young team. What do you think, Gerry?
Yeah, I think, look, it also kind of, what he said there also goes into what Sark said later, CJ, is that the offense may be trying too hard at times, right? So part of leadership is being smart enough as a quarterback to be real, say, all right, we're not clicking on all cylinders. We need to go we need to make sure we're on the same page. So, yeah, the leadership of first one in as a quarterback in the facility, last one to leave. Peyton Manning has probably told Arch that for years. That is your job as the quarterback and as a leader of a team. But I like kind of tying what Bobby talked about and what Sark just talked about to what else Sark talked about in that press conference and media availability yesterday, was that the defense is ahead of the offense. The offense has times have been forcing it, maybe letting one play affect them the next play. Well, how do you do that if you're smart about your leadership? You make sure everybody's on the same page. When
CJ, what are you hearing about leadership behind the scenes?
Well, I mean, it's a continuation of what we've heard from the summer and going back to the spring. Those throwing sessions in the offseason were organized by Arch Manning. The coordination of getting guys to work out with one another and stay in contact with one another while they were back home or not all in Austin together. A lot of that stems from Arch Manning. And then, of course, you look at, the summer camps, going up with Ryan Wingo to St. Louis. You look at DeAndre Moore being a big piece of this offense. A lot of that, again, coordinated by Arch Manning. And Gerry, to your point about, needing that camaraderie when that offense right now is who is behind the defense, right? And that was made pretty clear by Steve Sarkisian yesterday. Nothing to worry about yet. But point being, Texas has a lot of huddling going on in practice as well. And I think a lot of that is just saying, hey, Arch, control your group. Make sure everybody's on the same page. Let them hear your voice before going out to their position for whatever their assignment is on a given play, just so everybody's on the same page. And Sark talked about consistency, needing all 11 to be on the same page offensively. That's how you know you're progressing on that side of the football, is if everybody is showing consistently that they're doing what they're expected to do. I think huddling is a big part of that. Will they eventually just go into, kind of that spread offense? Probably. But for now, I think just hearing Arch's voice is kind of soothing a lot of these new faces in that offense as they take on larger responsibilities.
Yeah, for lack of a better term, not only is he a leader, he's the veteran in some ways to a lot of those guys, a lot of new faces, et cetera. CJ, you mentioned huddling. Is that something that you were hearing from behind the scenes that's going on in Texas practice? Because Quinn Ewers did not huddle much his last 2 years of practice. I can tell you that much. What, is that something that you're actually hearing from behind the scenes?
Yeah, a little bit more huddling to start, some of these live teams periods in practice. Texas, of course, going under center a little bit more as well. And I don't know if that's just because of the mobility of Arch or if that's a schematic shift with Sarkisian, but two big differences than what we've seen with a Quinn Ewers run offense. More huddling, more under center as well.
All right, interesting. All right, before we go to our questions that we're going to ask each other and to give you guys a feel of what we're thinking about some of fall camp thus far, I want to say thank you to our sponsor. That's Adam Lowy over at the Lowy Law Firm. If you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind and think you might be due compensation, make sure you reach out to Adam and his group for a free, no strings attached consultation. That's loweylawfirm.com, anything from an 18-wheeler to an ATV. Adam's there for you and your family. loweylawfirm.com. Thanks, Adam, for your sponsorship of On Texas Football. All right, let's ask these questions. The biggest news probably of the week thus far has to do with injuries, and that's Andre Kojo, young man on Saturday. It was revealed, CJ, you broke the news, that he's out for the season for Texas. We've talked about that already, but who does this affect, and how does it affect Texas? Other than just the machination of moving Nick Brooks and giving him a chance to be a backup on both sides, is it just about Nick Brooks in your opinion, Gerry, or what are your thoughts there?
No, it is. That's who it's about. I mean, Brandon Baker was the starter. He's going to be the starter. I think Texas wanted him pushed in his development, but he was going to be the starter. Andre Kojo was number 2. I think what that does, it accelerates the growth of Nick Brooks. Pure and simple, because he had taken some right tackle snaps, second team snaps last spring, right? Then after everybody knows about the incident, so he started third team left tackle for a period of time, but that wasn't the way it was going to stay. But now with that injury to Kojo, I think that accelerates Nick Brooks' development in Texas' eyes and say, okay, this guy not only has to be ready to play, but he has to be ready to play right tackle, which he has never worked at that much versus always being a left tackle. And there is a difference there. So I think pure and simple, that accelerates Nick Brooks' development at a different position, although it's still offensive tackle. He flipped the sides of the field. But the other thing is that also means you got to accelerate Jordan Coleman's growth a little bit because he's a play away now from being number 2.
CJ, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's very similar to what we saw a year ago with Trevor Gooseby, kind of being that that flanker at left or right tackle. He's got to be ready to go at both. My question is, who becomes now your 4th guy? Is it a Jordan Coleman? Is it a Jaden Chapman? Texas really likes what they have at their guard positions. Could you see a NATO even bump out to right tackle? He hasn't played it since high school, but it's one of those things where I think you have to explore that deeper avenue of true depth targets. We'll see if Texas ever gets to that point, but right now, Nick Brooks doing what Trevor Gooseby had to do a year ago, I think he's going to be better off for it. And, again, let's hope Texas stays healthy on that offensive line.
Man, I hope they don't have to move NATO out because he needs all the reps he can get at left guard, in my opinion, given that this is his first year starting. And, I mean, look, that helps Cole Hudson have communication with his left and right guard, et cetera. He wants to be able to do that. I would add this. You mentioned Jaden Chapman briefly. It's also an opportunity for Jaden Chapman to step up.
Yep.
I mean, Tony Hills was on this morning on our Coffee and Football episode. He said, look, next man up. So Jaden Chapman is fairly talented, guys.
Yep.
He may be in line for some playing time this year. So hopefully that's an opportunity that he relishes, right? And makes the most of. All right, let's go next. Position group. I want to ask you all the position group surprising you the most at this point. CJ, I'll let you start.
Yeah, it's tight end for me. I think this is the deepest tight end group Texas has had under Steve Sarkisian. I think it's the most versatile group of tight ends Texas has had under Steve Sarkisian. We haven't seen a 13 personnel look under Sark. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it pretty often. Again, it's not necessarily his MO, wants to spread the football, use that speed, but you've got some really talented mismatched guys with a Nick Townsend and Jack Indries, a Jordan Washington. Obviously, Spencer Shannon's a guy who provides that inline blocking ability as well. You've got plenty of options right now, and Maybe that's a remedy for some of those third and ones or fourth and ones that Texas has been struggling with to get into the end zone as well. Who knows? But I think you have a lot of different mismatches available at that tight end room at the moment.
Gerry, what do you think? Don't forget about Amari Winston too, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to go tight end, but I'll leave that one because that was already taken. So I'm going to go nickel because I was just thinking on the fly here. So Jalen Gilbo stays at corner. Grayson Littleton's taking reps with the first team at nickel. Michael Taff is working at nickel. Wardell Max at nickel. I mean, that position surprising in that Jalen Gilbo hasn't repped at nickel. So they're gonna, if they keep him at corner, what does that do? And what does that say if Michael Taff gets real reps at nickel? That means Texas loves their young safeties or Derek Williams coming off an injury. So nickel kind of affects a couple of other positions in my thinking, and maybe Jalen Gilbo starts that. But the nickel position to have a true freshman taking first team reps on a team that's ranked number 1, it says something. Michael Taff was an All-American candidate at safety, taking some reps at nickel. And then a young guy, Wardell Mack, who had a really good spring at nickel, who may start the season as a third team nickel if the other two things transpire in front of him.
That's interesting. I like y'all's picks. CJ, your tight end pick, I'm a little concerned about age in that group.
Yeah.
You go to 13 personnel. I mean, that's a young group overall to lean on, even though that I think I agree with you that it's been really surprising. And Gerry, I can understand where you're going because they're manufacturing depth at nickel for sure. And that was maybe more than we anticipated because Michael Taff, we did not know was going to be working at nickel until a week into, and basically until the very beginning of fall camp. And including with Gilbo staying outside, they're manufacturing some depth along with Grayson Littleton's just overall ability to play the role better than expected. So I think those are all good. I'm going to go a little bit different than y'all. I go defensive tackle. And it's not so much that it's surprising me as it is a pleasant surprise. Because it's one thing to get these guys on campus. It's another thing for the guys to start earning some individual praise. And I grew up in the world of recruiting where everybody thinks the next guy up is the best thing since sliced bread. Everybody's looking for you know what I mean? It's just one of those ideas behind recruiting. Well, the transfer portal is a little bit different, but it's still recruiting because you're getting people you don't really know. Like you haven't, you don't know if their culture fits. You don't know their work habits. You see their effort on film, but that's all you see. I'm being told that they're really, really happy right now, not only with Alex January and Murad Watson, but Travis Shaw. Very happy with him. Happy with Cole Brevard. We'll see what happens with Levon Johnson. That's somebody that Steve Sarkisian mentioned yesterday in the press conference that he hadn't been mentioning because he had been out with a left ankle injury, Gerry and CJ. My thought process on the most surprising position, it's just the pleasant surprise of the idea that there's going to be some depth at that position, which Sark again said that he might have more depth at defensive tackle next year than he had last year when Texas was pretty darn good at the position.
Yeah, Texas essentially leaned on 3.5 guys last year in terms of snaps. It was Alfred Collins, Vernon, Lole, and then the half is Bill Norton because he was situational at times, right, and had one job. And then Alex January, bits and pieces. But it was essentially 3.5 guys for the bulk of the season. This year, it's going to be 5.5 guys, if not 6.5 guys. That is a major change. And I said on Coffee and Football, like, to me, that just means everybody's going to have fresh snaps.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be fresh for their snaps. And Sark talked about keeping those guys healthier long-term if they don't have to play as many snaps. Now, the key in all this situation, all 6 or 7 of those guys have to buy into the roles. And if they all buy into the roles, Hero Canoe as well, if they all buy into the roles, I think we're going to see this Texas D-line just take off throughout the season.
All right, final question for this episode of Stay of the Program that I want to pose to y'all. Player not being talked about enough at this point. Player not being talked about enough at this point, in your opinion. CJ, let you go first again.
Yeah, it might sound a little crazy because of how high profile an addition he was, but I think Emmett Mosley's that guy. He's had a great fall camp so far. Of course, this is the first time Texas was able to see him in a practice situation since arriving in the summer. And I know that a lot of the offseason talk was, okay, Texas, a lot of brand new faces and larger roles, but there's familiarity there with Arch Manning and Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore. Obviously, we heard about the spring and the emergence of Parker Livingstone. That's really where you see that wide receiver picture at the moment. But look, hearing from Steve Sarkisian yesterday, he basically told the media, I think he does everything better than what was expected or what people think of him as currently. He's 6'2", 210 pounds, jumps a little bit higher, runs a little bit faster than expected. And having watched him catch passes in practice last week, I mean, it just looks natural to him. So I think after a really, really solid year at Stanford a year ago, he's ready to move into this offense and be a really big piece of it.
Gerry, you like that pick of Mosley, and anybody you want to single out?
Malik Muhammad. So
Interesting.
Yeah. So look, he had a really solid season. Maybe not the great ending to the season that he wanted to have, but he's going into his hopes to be 3-and-out draft year.
Yep.
And what did we hear? We've heard he's had a couple of picks in camp. And if Manny is going to be a guy that can elevate his draft stock and maybe get into that first round conversation, second round pick, he's got to become more of a playmaker.
Yeah.
And if he takes that next step as a playmaker this year, which it seems like he is, that's the first thing that caught our attention when he got on campus, was that spring. It seemed like every practice we heard about, he caused a fumble, he had a fumble recovery, he had an interception. He's only had one interception in 2 seasons, and he's played a lot of snaps at Texas. If he can turn in a 3 or 4 interception season, his NFL stock goes up, and you want him to be a 3-and-out player. That's why you recruit really good players. You want him to be a 3-and-out player and go in the first or second round. But I think he's not being talked about enough for the camp he appears to be having.
That's a good point. And I will add one other thing to that was interesting. Sark talked yesterday, guys, about wanting his DBs to play the ball more, to create more turnovers.
Yeah.
It's clear that he felt like maybe the DBs were a little too cautious in coverage at times over the last couple of years. So he wants more guys playing the ball. Muhammad would be a big benefactor of that, obviously.
Yes. By the way, what's the sense in having a great pass rush if you're playing way off or you're not in a position to make a play on a forced pass or an early pass, or when a quarterback's moving in the pocket and doesn't have mustard on the football? What's the point of it? Hey, may as well not rush the passer. You got to be in position to make plays with what your pass rush is causing prior to the ball being released.
All right, guys, I'm going to go a little different than y'all. I'm going the backup quarterback role, and I think that is one of the key battles this camp. And I'm just going to tell you, I hear Matthew Caldwell's having a solid camp. It's only been a week. Obviously, he worked out with the team in the summer, but Caldwell has been very consistent. He's been very adaptive to the offense. He gets, it's going to sound like a very small thing. He's a little bit quicker getting the handoffs. He's a little bit quicker than some of the backups doing some of the small things. I'm hearing that Matthew Caldwell's having a quietly solid camp. If they go into Ohio State, I would not be surprised if Arch has to sit for any reason for a period of time, that Matthew Caldwell might be the guy that gets called.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where I'm at, and I think that we've heard some really superlatives at times from Trey Owens and KJ Lacey in this camp, but overall, I'm a big believer at this point in Matthew Caldwell likely getting that backup role. We'll see what occurs. All right, before we let folks go on this episode of On Texas Football's State of the Program, you guys have anything you guys want to add to the greater discussion with Texas in this fall camp?
Well, you're not going to hear a lot about special teams, right? Field goal kicking and punting. You're just not going to hear a lot about that. but I think it's going to be greatly improved, and I don't think anything's done to change any opinions on that.
I like that. I'll add, I think this is a hungry team, and I know you can't quantify hungriness with a football team. It's just one of those, characteristics or traits that you hear thrown out there. But look, there are a lot of guys fighting for spots, fighting for reps, fighting for time on the field. And, it's one of those things where, camp gets heated at times. And I think it's one of those things that it's good for the team. It's good for that competition in camp. And it shows the hungriness to go out there and really, get ready to hit somebody not in the same color jersey as you. So early on, I'm really encouraged by the hungriness of what we're hearing at a number of key position battles and position groups.
All right. I'll go back to where we started this with, and you mentioned that hunger. It's the hunger to improve. And what Sark talked about with Arch Manning at the very outset of this episode that we had is it's indicative of that hunger or representative of it, right? It's not about saying you want to be good. It's about doing the things you need to do to be good. That was really, when Sark said that was really, really impressive, because it wasn't, and I talked about this, it wasn't just staying after with the running backs and working on handoffs. It wasn't just staying after with the receivers and working, on air on routes. It was the entire offense. That's getting into the detail-oriented nature. That's letting hunger turn into action, right? And that's, if Texas is going to be great this year, they're going to need that. I thought it was a very, very good sign that it was happening this early in camp, CJ and Gerry. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks again to our sponsor, Adam Lowy, over at the Lowy Law Firm. Again, if you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind and think you may be due compensation, reach out to Adam and his group, loweylawfirm.com. Thank you, Adam. Thank you also, CJ Vogel and Gerry Hamilton, as well as our producer, Matt Hutchison. And thank you guys out there, 24 days away from Longhorn football against Ohio State. We'll see you again soon. This has been On Texas Football. Hook 'em.